Truck drivers were essential workers and are even more so now. So they're a very vital link, but at the same time, the concern is, are they safe on the road? Especially with inexperienced drivers who are filling some of that gap.
I'm attorney Dave Craig, managing partner and one of the founders of the law firm of Craig, Kelley Faultless. I've represented people who have been seriously injured or who have had a family member killed in a semi or other big truck wreck for over 30 years. Following the wreck, their lives are chaos. Often they don't even know enough about the process to ask the right questions. It is my goal to empower you by providing you with the information you need to protect yourself and your family. In each and every episode, I will interview top experts and professionals that are involved in truck wreck cases. This is After the Crash. Well, welcome to After the Crash. This is Dave Craig with the law firm of Craig, Kelley Faultless, and today we're interviewing Dr. David Fletcher. Dr. Fletcher is a licensed physician out of the state of Illinois. He's a practicing doctor. He actually sees patients on a regular, ongoing basis, and he is the medical director and CEO of SafeWorks Illinois. He's certified medical review officer. He's also a certified substance abuse professional. He full-time practices in occupational medicine. And the key thing to me is that he's board certified in occupational and preventive medicine, but he's been on the leading forefront of truck driver and commercial motor vehicle drivers' safety since 1995. So he's one of the earlier ones that got involved and is helping making the roads safe for everyone. He does this on behalf of trucking companies as well as folks who happen to be injured. He's testified all over this country as an expert witness on both sides of the equation, sometimes working for the trucking company, like I said, talking about the drivers, whether that they are safe, and sometimes for the victims when truck drivers are not safe. He's an advocate for safety. He's an advocate for having commercial motor vehicle drivers be in good physical shape as they're required to be safe, and which keeps all of us that are using the highway safe. Well, welcome, Dr. Fletcher.
Well, thanks for the nice introduction, David. It's glad to be here, and I'm glad to be able to be on this show and help give my perspective on what is going on currently in regards to the safety of the traveling public as it deals with commercial truck drivers.
You know, we see there's more and more truck drivers. I drive from my Indianapolis office to my St. Louis office, and I see, the highways flooded with semis. And, as an attorney who's been practicing for over 35 years and who have handled cases against trucking, negligent trucking companies and truck drivers for that same length of time, I get concerned. I get concerned because of the type of cases I've seen about the health of the drivers that are behind the wheels of semis. Let's just talk generally about, the semi drivers and their health.
Well, I share your concerns about, being on the highways these days, especially the roads seem to be more crowded. Certainly, even during the pandemic, truck drivers were essential workers and are even more so now, especially as the entire economy is dealing with, concerns about supply chain. And so they're a very vital link. But at the same time, the concern is, are they safe on the road? Especially with inexperienced drivers who are filling some of that gap. So that's kind of my opening thoughts. The roads are more crowded. We got inexperienced drivers. So I certainly share your concerns.
And one of the things is, I just saw something on 60 Minutes yesterday, I think, where they're talking about a shortage of drivers, and you can't read anything in this industry where they don't talk about the shortage of drivers and how they're trying to find drivers, whether they're going to younger drivers, or they're going back and pulling older drivers back into the field, or they're pulling inexperienced drivers and training them. So there's concern that we're eager and we need competent drivers. But as a plaintiff lawyer, somebody who represents the victims of semi-tractor trailers, obviously there's a concern that you're putting the wrong people behind the wheel, and that worries me.
Well, I think your worry is well founded, David. Is that we have all this, focus on airline safety, and the, FAA has almost 70 doctors working for the FAA. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has one physician out there monitoring the health of truck drivers. It's a concern, and I think you're right on. And I think it gets back to that because of this shortage of drivers, that they are not being vetted physically like they should be. The only thing I will say that's advantageous during this recent, pandemic that's been beneficial is that the Federal Motor Safety Carrier Administration pioneered this new thing called a clearinghouse, where anybody who's had a drug or alcohol violation since January 6, 2020 have to be on the clearinghouse. And they have, and it's a way when trucking companies look back at their drivers, they can query this trade database and see there's been a violation. And that's, I think, the most positive thing that's been about safety over the last 2 years. And I believe it's going to really help prevent a lot of accidents, especially in this day and age with legalized marijuana. Marijuana is still not acceptable for a truck driver because it's a safety sensitive drug, and even though it may be legal, you can't be a truck driver and use it. Because of its legalization, a lot more and more people are using it, and so when they go take a physical for a trucking company, it turn out positive. And the nice thing about the clearinghouse is that trucking company cannot hire them. They have to go through a substance abuse professional protocol. And then they have to, if they're going to come back to work, they have to have negative observed drug screen. And then they're subject to at least 6 random drug screens in the coming year.
And I know that, I know you're certified substance abuse professional, and I know that's a growing area in this field. How knowledgeable do you think trucking companies are about this? And what are the qualifications of somebody who helps the trucking companies make sure that their drivers, first of all, that they use the clearinghouse and that they make sure their drivers are being properly not only detected, but then rehabilitated, I guess?
Right. Good question. Well, first of all, they have to use the clearinghouse. Any trucking company has to do a query on their driver in the clearinghouse. So what that does is prevent the driver from lying about his past violations. In the past, trucking companies depended upon a look back program to contact the prior employers for the last 3 years to see if there's been a violation. The cooperation on that has probably been about, in my experience, at 50% at best. Now this program will have teeth in it, that a driver won't be able to jump from truck carrier to another carrier and lie about his past, because they have to get off the clearinghouse if they're eligible. They can perform safety sensitive tasks. I think that's a major positive thing. I think a lot of trucking companies still are struggling, even almost 2 years after its introduction, about the clearinghouse, how to work with substance abuse professionals. One of the things that, because I'm both a medical review officer and a substance abuse professional, very strange, is that I have to have 2 separate email addresses for those services and rather than have the ability to consolidate all of them under one email. So I have to have my MRO email and have my SAP email. But we try to work with the trucking companies and educate them. And I think with more time, it's going to be helpful. I really believe it's taking the burden off companies who were struggling with their driver qualification and investigation to get information from past employers.
Well, let's talk about it. As you know, this podcast is, I put this out for just ordinary folks, people who may have been the victims or know somebody who's been a victim of a semi-tractor trailer wreck or another significant wreck with a commercial motor vehicle. And what I found through 35 years is these folks don't even know what questions to ask. They have no idea how this industry works. They know any idea how the lawsuit works, how a claim works. And so I think that my goal is to educate ordinary folks and have them help them understand. So I think the first starting place is for them to understand is that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations have certain requirements, and their requirements are designed to make the road safer by disqualifying drivers that shouldn't drive. And there's a procedures in place that does that. And there's physicians who folks will understand or heard of a DOT exam or getting a medical card. there's qualified professionals who do these exams. So let's talk a little bit just generally about what is in place to make sure that semi-truck drivers are safe and healthy and physically fit to drive a truck.
Well, I think you mentioned the most critical piece of information is the FMCSA regulations require trucking companies to only put on medically qualified drivers on the road. It also has the mechanics for a driver who has to have a medical examination periodically by a qualified medical examiner to make sure that they meet the physical qualifications of the standards. And obviously requires competent physicians, but also really requires trucking companies to be involved and not just delegate all the decision making to the physician who provides the examination. And so I kind of like to stay this, what I call a 3-tier system of safety. Tier 1 in protecting the public is the driver's honesty about their health conditions. When they complete the commercial driver medical examination, which was called the FMCSA Form 8575 long form, that they're accurate and truthful about their history. Unfortunately, a lot of truck drivers, because it affects their living, are not always truthful and admit stuff. So the second tier of the system is the medical examiner, such as myself. And you want a medical examiner who understands the regulations, who is quite aware that it's common in the industry for truck drivers not to be truthful. And so that requires the medical examiner to really do a lot of probing questions and, ask stuff about, their sleep, if they snore, if they lose their breath at night, if they've had a past history of any substance abuse, if they've had any, heart conditions, blood pressure, diabetes, more common diseases. And it's just doing a very thorough exam, getting good history. And if you're not sure, or they tell you got something, you trust, but you verify. You get their medical records. You go over their medical records and verify the information they're telling them. And you can defer those drivers for up to 45 days to make a final determination if they're fit to drive. So that's the first 2 tiers. Well, unfortunately, the second tier oftentimes fails because there are a lot of doctors out there and other health professionals doing these exams that don't do a very thorough job. And so they allow some drivers to get on the road who shouldn't be there because they've ignored important health conditions. Most common ones are diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, obstructive sleep apnea, seizure disorders, medication issues. Those are the ones that are just commonly overlooked or not investigated thoroughly. So what that requires then is the third tier, which is the most important tier, is the trucking company. As I said, David, the trucking company is ultimately responsible for putting medically qualified drivers on the road. They may not practice medicine, but that is their charge. And so they have the ability to supervise these physicians. They have language in the regs. 345F allows them to do a fitness for duty exam anytime they're concerned about a driver's mental health or physical ability to drive. They have the tools to do that anytime. And so they have to, watch their doctors. They have to properly vet their doctors, and they're competent. A lot of the trucking companies have learned the hard way that they've been burned by their doctors not doing a thorough job. And so they will have a system in place to review all the long forms, and they will do periodic audits of their doctors. So that's kind of the 3-tier system. And so unfortunately, in a lot of the accidents that I've been involved with as a plaintiff's expert, all 3 of those tiers have been pierced. And that's why the public was not protected, because of failure. The driver lied, the doctor didn't do a thorough examination, and the trucking company didn't properly supervise or vet their medical examiner.
So the people know, who are the people that, let's go to that second tier with the folks that are doing the exams. Walk us through. I know you've done thousands of these exams. And I know your company has done thousands of these exams and does regularly, yearly, thousands of these exams. What's involved in one of these exams?
Well, what you're talking about is the commercial vehicle medical examination. We would call it CDME, or traditionally was known as the DOT medical. Is an examination that requires, number one, completing the FMCSA medical history form and actually signing it and attesting that it's accurate, and being subject to prosecution if you lie, or also revocation of your medical certificate. So that's the most important part, is that the history completed by the examinee. So then the medical staff of the provider who's doing the exam will do height and weight, which will be able to calculate a body mass index, or a BMI. They will also do a hearing test. They'll do a urinalysis test, looking predominantly for any spilling of sugar that would indicate diabetes. It also includes taking the blood pressure and pulse readings. So all that's done prior to the examiner coming in and seeing the patient. But once that's all completed, it's really the examiner who's taking a more thorough history of looking at the responses on that long form and asking very probing questions. And if you're not satisfied with answers, defer this person, do not qualify them, recommend what you need to make a decision on their ability to safely drive a commercial vehicle. Because ultimately, that medical examiner does have responsibility. They may not have a doctor-patient-physician relationship with the driver, but ultimately they are still responsible. And if they negligently issue a medical certificate and that driver gets in an accident with a medical condition that should have precluded him from being on the roads, that physician can be sued. And I've been an expert witness in several cases where the medical examiner has been successfully sued for that reason.
And now, I mean, when I first started, there was no national registry as far as who were these people out there doing these exams. I know you were a big advocate, and you've been an advocate of making it even, putting more checkpoints in, making it even safer than the system we have now. But we do have a national registry, which I think started in 2014, that lists the folks that are qualified to do these exams. But I think people will be surprised at the type of people who do it. Are they just medical doctors that are qualified to do that, or who else can do one of these exams to vet a truck driver before they take the road and get a license, a CDL?
Well, that's an excellent question, David. Unfortunately, there is not that much restriction on the person to do the exams. It's not just medical doctors like myself. It includes mid-level providers such as nurse practitioners and physician's assistants, which I think is okay if they're properly supervised, but it also allows physical therapists, it allows chiropractors to do it. I'm a very pro chiropractor for musculoskeletal conditions, but I don't believe they have any business in making a determination about the fitness for a driver. They don't have the training to make complex decisions on pharmaceutical issues, cardiovascular issues, diabetes, and so forth like this. And so what happened when they expanded the system with the National Registry, I think it was a step backwards as far as allowing, in my opinion, unqualified health professionals to certify these drivers. You said in the onset of your question about my own belief about the need to be even stronger. So when I was the first physician in the United States to propose a FAA medical system lookalike for the Federal Motor Safety Carrier Administration. This was back in the early 90s. And I started the first training program for physicians regarding certified truck drivers in 1995. That was through the American College of Occupational Environmental Medicine. And that course continues to the present day. I was unsuccessful of being part of a Federal Highway Administration committee to get an FAA lookalike system. Still have not abandoned that because I believe even more so it's necessary. The FAA system has only 2,000 physicians in the United States that does these examinations. Quick, very strict educational requirements, supervision, grading of your exams. I can also look at prior exams from other examiners. and see if there's been past issues. It prevents doctor shopping. The National Registry was a watered down version of what I recommended. And currently it has almost 44,000 healthcare professionals that are able to do these examinations. Way too much. The quality is very uneven. Even worse was the fact that a few years ago the NRCME system got hacked for almost 9 or 10 months. We were unable to send examinations in. Also, even more glaring was the Government Accounting Office earlier in 2021 issued a very scathing audit of the National Registry program and the whole system as far as certifying drivers. And I certainly, endorse that. And as part of my leadership, I'm trying to, again, point direction to tighten up the quality of the program. And I believe the trucking companies would benefit significantly with this. You've got 44,000 people on a list. There's some quality concerns. And one aspect of it, you were supposed to do continuing education every 5 years. Well, that was in 2014. They've not set up any kind of follow-up requirements for continuing medical education. That should have been completed by 2019. We're about to start 2022. There's been no program in place at all for that. And in fact, in 2024, you're going to see 38,000 people who are medical examiners who their certification is going to expire, and there's no program in place for recertifying. So, in my opinion, the NRCME had some good meetings, but it's been an utter disaster in my book.
Well, I think if the goal is to reduce and prevent truck accidents and fatalities, I can't imagine anybody being against that. If that's the ultimate goal, the trucking industry benefits from that. The consumer, the folks on the roadways benefit from that. But unfortunately, we still see pushback from the industry for a variety of different reasons. But I think that, the doctors and the folks that are doing these exams, I think first of all, because I represent victims, I don't want people listening to this to think that I think all trucking companies are bad, because they're not. There are some really good trucking companies that do the right thing, that make sure that their drivers are physically fit and capable of driving. There are some really good truck drivers who are educated, who have health issues, but are not afraid of losing their job because their employer, the trucking company, stands beside them and educates them on, hey, here's what you need to do. And like sleep apnea, we've talked about that before, but they help educate people that say, hey, look, once you start getting treated, you can get back behind the wheel. So there are good truck drivers and there are good trucking companies out there. And I assume you've seen the same thing.
I have. I certainly agree with you in that what we try to do is be an advocate for the truck driver, because oftentimes you're the only healthcare professional they see, because they're out on the road and their lifestyle's not very good. They're often overweight because they're eating on the road, making poor choices. They can't exercise much. So the DOT exams are really important outreach to this population. And so if you can educate them, be honest about your situation, most of these conditions we can get you back out there driving. We're not going to be able to get you back out there driving if you got a seizure disorder, but we are able to work with these drivers and explain to them what has to be done for them to be medically qualified and refer them to other specialists that are knowledgeable. But I think the important part is that you need to understand there are trucking companies out there that do like quality exams, that they know that saves them money. And that a lot of companies, I'm going to give you an example, one is like Schneider. They've kind of pioneered their sleep apnea program. Well, actually, a trucking company that's no longer in existence that I was a medical director for, called Roberson Trucking, we started their sleep apnea program in 1995. And they paid for the testing for sleep studies. They got them on insurance, and they saved a lot of money on their healthcare costs by having me as their medical director identify these health conditions. And so they found it is economically, by helping their drivers qualify and be healthier, was a major cost savings. Plus, it also helped them in their retention of drivers. So I think forward-thinking companies realize that quality exams do matter. And a lot of the trucking companies I deal with will also utilize what I talked about earlier, David, that fitness for duty provision called the 345F exam. I have multiple of my trucking companies that from all over the state, they have somebody that's up in like Rockford or Peoria and that's been off work. They want me to see the person before they go back driving, even though they still have a valid DOT medical certificate. And any educating trucking companies about that is so very, very, very helpful because that's going to stop accidents and make a major difference. So, I mean, I there are a lot of pluses out there. So I think it's educating them, such as your program, educating the public about this, but educating trucking companies that we know you want drivers, but find quality drivers. And if you have incentive programs such as insurance to pay for CPAP for sleep apnea, you're going to get drivers. And if you're concerned about their wellness and health and you're doing stuff for them, I think it's only going to add more quality of drivers and more retention.
I think, and I see that. I mean, the cases that I handle where people are killed or seriously injured, they are the companies that are not, they're putting profits ahead of safety. They're cutting corners. They're just trying to get people behind the wheel. They're trying to find the cheapest drivers, not necessarily the most qualified drivers. And that's a problem. I had you mentioned epilepsy. I handled a case where a trucking company had a driver who was epileptic. And so they told him he couldn't drive. He had a seizure at work. They took him off the road, but they got a pinch. They didn't have enough drivers. They went back to that driver, knowing he had epilepsy, knowing he had seizure disorder, knowing that they had seen him have a seizure, and they sent him to a doctor who they knew would rubber stamp his card. And I did the deposition of this doctor, and this is a doctor who was at the end of his career. He had not much of a practice left, that he was making money by running trucking companies, were running people through his office. And I've talked to deposed his staff, and these exams, supposedly exams, they were going back into the back room with the doctor, coming out in 5 minutes and with a card. And, and that's the problem when you have unqualified people out there doing these exams, because the bad companies will seek them out and find them and then use them. And then this man had a seizure behind the wheel and severely injured my client. And so the good companies will seek out the good qualified healthcare providers to do their exams because they want to prevent wrecks. But unfortunately, the bad companies, if there's not a good system in place to weed out the bad healthcare providers, the bad companies will seek out and find. And I've done more than one deposition of bad doctors doing exams, or sometimes companies will have captured where they send all their drivers to one place and they want to keep those drivers on the road. And so those doctors are somewhat biased and not doing it quite as an objective job. And I assume you've seen that as well.
I have, unfortunately, but I hope that the doctor you involved in the deposition got criminally prosecuted.
He's no longer practicing.
And so, I mean, it's getting more teeth into the prosecution area regarding some of these physicians who are doing slipshod work and are basically a mill, aren't doing quality exams. There was a case recently in Georgia, where a doctor was claiming he's doing 25, exams an hour, which is impossible. And so it's going to take more cases like that. I think also when physicians realize they're going to get sued and be for negligent issuance, it helps in that. So, you obviously have represented, families who've had suffered severe trauma from a loved one either being killed or severely maimed. Until 2019, I never had that experience. And then 2019, my first wife and mother of my two kids was killed on Interstate 80 from a reckless driver. It wasn't a truck driver. But I've experienced on a personal level, the agony that has to a family that deals with a sudden tragic death on the highways. In this particular case, the driver is still under criminal prosecution in California, but it's just horrible, and it's something you have to deal with every day the rest of your life. And so I empathize with the families you represent, and I know a lot of the cases where I'm a plaintiff's expert, the families are particularly interested in preventing a similar tragedy to happen to some other family. And each of these cases that you take care of our further pressure on trucking companies, physicians, as well as drivers, is that we have to do a better job about vetting the drivers that go out on our highways and byways.
And I would encourage people listening to this, if you are the family of someone and you are going through this process, oftentimes my clients, as part of the process, would like to make the road safer. And you and I worked on a case, and we can't say the name of the company, but you and I worked on a case recently with sleep apnea, and my clients felt very strongly that they not only wanted this case resolved, but the only way they would resolve it would be if the company would make changes to their policies and procedures, and we could document that, and they could verify that to me on sleep apnea and trying to prevent drivers who aren't physically fit for driving vehicles. And in that case, you actually did an exam of the driver, and you came to the opinion that he had sleep apnea, and yet he had a card. He was approved by one of the physicians that the trucking company had sent him to. But that physician didn't have all the information. Like you said, sometimes truck drivers don't tell the whole story because they don't want to be taken off the road. They don't want to lose their livelihood. When you did the exam, you actually got information. You asked questions about snoring, and you found out that this man was a loud snorer. You found out that his neck size was very, I think it was 17 and a half. His BMI was high. He was over 60. He had the checklist of what looking for sleep apnea. He hit most of them, yet he still was approved to drive a truck. And unfortunately, 6 people died because he fell asleep at the wheel.
I know. Those are the cases that I live to take care of, to help prevent that from happening for someone else, because that family, those 2 different families involved, just devastated with that, and it should never have happened. And that driver obviously had sleep apnea, was undiagnosed, and the physician who certified him ignored all the various scientific information out there. The guy was a poster child for sleep apnea, yet he was approved. And if that company had a good auditing program in place to supervise their drivers, they would have had him examined by someone else and would have been taken off the road until he got a sleep test and treated for sleep apnea. And so now they've taken the economic hit for that accident, and hopefully they'll reflect on the fact that not only was this a tragedy, but this was an opportunity for us to learn from, and hopefully to meet your clients' needs, that they've actually made corporate changes to improve their vetting of drivers.
How big is sleep apnea? How big of a problem is sleep apnea in the industry?
It's a big problem because of the demographics of drivers. More drivers are males, more drivers over 45 years old. Again, you have a high percentage of obesity. You have people that are sedentary, they got high blood pressure. So they're set up for all the risk factors. I mean, studies say there's only 5 to 6% of the population has obstructive sleep apnea, and I say it's garbage. It's one of the most unrecognized public health problems that exist. And I know firsthand. I've had obstructive sleep apnea myself since 2011. Use CPAP, and I can remember a couple of times almost getting driving late at night in crashes myself. So I've kind of experienced that. So I actually like CPAP, but it makes me feel much more refreshed and better. But as far as the scope of the problem in the trucking industry, it's not 4 to 5%. In my opinion, based on my experience for 35 years, I would probably estimate that at least 30 to 35% of drivers in the United States have undiagnosed obstructive sleep apnea. Fortunately, trucking companies have learned. I'm seeing a high percentage of drivers who come to my office are on CPAP that love it. That provide compliance, that allows them to continue to be safely on the road. So it's an unrecognized problem. If I was a trucking company, some of these basic things, such as heart disease, diabetes, sleep apnea, substance abuse, concentrate in those core top areas, you're going to have a lot safer drivers.
And I think that, you see some companies trying to do that. Unfortunately, there are still those that aren't. I think you worked on our office with someone a truck driver who had a heart attack and plowed into my client. It was in a motorhome at a gas station. And we still see heart attacks. You still see sleep apnea, and the drug issues. I mean, we're still seeing a fair amount of drug issues as well, and drivers that have those issues.
Unfortunately, we are. I mean, I do feel that there's been some awakening in the industry. And, I've been involved with, as a defense expert for trucking companies where they've done all the right things, where they've had a legitimate unforeseen medical emergency of their driver that wouldn't have been picked up by the DOT process. We always have a lot to improve upon, but I think it's shows like yours and the work that you do and your firm does, it just every step helps make our highways safer. And I've been doing expert witness work in this field for 21, 22 years. Unfortunately, the cases keep piling up, but I do see some improvement.
Well, I think that I think your three tiers, safety tiers. I think the third one is, in my opinion, is the most critical, and that's the trucking companies.
So do I. I've said that so many times, and I've always kind of throw my hands up. Well, we don't practice medicine. We may not practice medicine, but you're still in charge of making sure they're medically qualified, and it allows you. Tools are there to make sure you put the right drivers on it, and plus you have economic incentive to make sure they are, not going to be, out there when they shouldn't be. And I know that they want to fill those bodies, but you just gave the great example of a seizure disorder. I mean, to me, that's criminal behavior on part of the trucking company.
Right. Well, and you see. I mean, I don't know how many times I still hear trucking companies tell me, well, he had a valid card. He went through and got a DOT card. He's okay. He's allowed to drive. And they ignore the fact that, no, the requirements are he has to be physically fit and capable of driving safely, not just that he has a card, right?
I have complete agreement with that. I hate when I hear, well, he had a valid medical certificate. It doesn't mean anything. Because I've given expert opinion on multiple occasions that certification was invalid. I mean, just for the instance I said earlier, that if the person falsified his medical history, then invalidates the card on the spot. They could be criminally prosecuted. Again, it's the trucking companies have to make sure they meet the physical qualifications. And there are 12 specific areas that they have to meet, including the drug and alcohol, which is the last regulation. So again, trucking company, they're the ultimate ones to make the biggest difference.
I mean, you could have a medical certification on, say you got it today, and you could assume, let's assume the driver told the truth, that you had a valid and a good, capable, qualified physician, and they approved them. And then that card will be good for a period of time. But tomorrow they could have a stroke or they could have something else happen to them that no longer makes them qualified. They're not physically capable anymore of driving. That card, no, the doctors wouldn't know about it. And that's where your trucking company, if they saw that, they see the drivers, they have the incentive to monitor the health of the drivers, that if something happens after the issuance of the card, before it's renewed, they have a duty to step in and take that driver off the road until he's physically fit to qualify to drive.
That's extremely correct. Just because you have a certificate for 2 years doesn't mean you have a blank check to drive every day. And you give a perfect example is you could have an intervening health event happen in that period. And so there's incumbent upon a duty for the trucking company to intervene and get that person examined. They have the tools. It's not like they can complain, hey, we can't get a driver seen because he's got a valid card. Well, again, you have a duty to only put fit drivers on the road, and you have information that this person's fitness for duty is questionable. You got to get them evaluated.
So what are the biggest problems that you see that we haven't talked about? Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you see in this area that you would like to either see improved or that you see as a continuing ongoing problem?
Well, I think as far as improvement is trying to educate trucking companies that quality exams really save them money. I think that process and that there are ways that your medical providers can help keep those drivers on the road and the process behind that, and that investing in your driver's health to keep them fit is actually a good investment for your company, especially with all the turnover out there in the market. So that's kind of the first thing is quality exams matter, invest in your drivers. Secondly, we've got to improve the system. The NRCME system, in my opinion, sucks. Again, I think I've been involved with 5 or 6 different cases with chiropractors that had no business certifying a driver. I do know in the state of New York has a specific regulation. They do not allow chiropractors to certify drivers in New York. And again, I have great respect for chiropractors for musculoskeletal conditions, but not for making complex decisions on ability to go out and have a multi-ton vehicle go out and potentially kill somebody. So I think just a little overhauling of the system. I'm a big believer in the FAA system. I still think that would be really good because right now there's no recourse for us as physicians to have defer somebody and have the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration office help assist in the decision making. The whole reason I got involved in the whole aspect of trying to improve the system was I have been an FAA medical examiner since 1988, and the FAA system is the greatest in the country in that there's only 2,000 examiners, computerized system, MedExpress software is just wonderful. That's done before the person comes into the office, and you've got all these consultants you can get involved with and help you make decisions, and you've got backup and you've got scientific department. Despite all the fatalities we have with trucking, compared to the number of aviation fatalities we have each year, I think the resources are in the wrong place. Not that I want to see the FAA system lessened, because I think it's a wonderful system, but if you were going to put resources in from a fatality number, I keep hearing the thing, well, there's 14 million potential truck and bus drivers out there compared to 600,000 pilots. I still think we need to put the resources in the medical system to make sure those 14 million should be on the road. Right now, our country is not protected like it should be.
And I would agree 100%. What do you think the biggest? I mean, why? I mean, it makes sense. I think the people. Maybe it's just lack of information because people that hire me, they don't know about truck wrecks until their family is in one. They don't know the statistic. But why wouldn't we adopt such a system?
Well, I think a lot of it is because there's this mistaken belief that there won't be enough examiners out there to certify that number of truck drivers. As I said, 2,000 are out there for 600,000 pilots. I think if we had a system, 8 to 10,000 medical examiners, I think that would meet the needs for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and the FTA, Federal Transit Administration needs. A lot of it is just because of that aspect. And also they're afraid they're not going to have drivers. You have a more regimented system. It's going to eliminate a lot of drivers. I mean, I have drivers right now, David, that we failed. I've had drivers who falsified a medical certificate from my office, who I've reported to the FMCSA. They get a car from someone else. They're out there driving. There's no program in place. And, we've reported people who've lied to us, all sorts of things like, until a year ago, there wasn't even a physician in the FMCSA office. And again, right now, they're doing this whole reboot of the NRC CME system and medical examiner system. So it's something I would like to take up with the Transportation Secretary, Mayor Pete, and try to get his interest in it and educate it. There's obviously more regulations, but I think ultimately a cost analysis, this would be a positive thing for trucking companies.
Well, I appreciate everything you've done to make the road safer, and hopefully you will keep championing that cause, because we're all affected. Well, my client made a decision here recently, and I've had other clients do the same thing where they would rather take less money and have companies change their policies and procedures. I'm a big advocate of that. It's not all about the money. We have to take care of our clients, but if we can make each company one at a time a little bit safer, then then we've accomplished something. And what you're doing is trying to make the whole industry safer. And I really appreciate that on behalf of all of us that use the highways.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's a joint effort from all of us. What you do is so important, and getting your clients to understand that it's not all about the money; it's about making a difference. And that's what I've enjoyed. I feel like I've made a contribution to the debate. And I want to continue to provide some leadership out there. And it's sad that we still have these cases accumulating.
Well, Doctor, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, just thank you for your efforts. And I think if you have any families that my experience dealing with your firm in a couple of cases has been wonderful, and I think you really do a great job representing your clients and achieve good results and explain things. So I certainly want to give an endorsement for the great work you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Doctor.
All right. Thank you. All right. I got to go back and see some patients. See ya.
Okay, thanks. This is David Craig, and you've been listening to After the Crash. If you'd like more information about me or my law firm, please go to our website, ckflaw.com. Or if you'd like to talk to me, you can call 1-800-ASK-DAVID. If you would like a guide on what to do after a truck wreck, then pick up my book, Semi-Truck Wreck, a guide for victims and their families, which is available on Amazon, or you can download it for free on our website, ckflaw.com.